This is an undergravel filter, and I'm about to tell you why Grandpa's old air-powered filter doesn't cut it in today's aquarium. Hello everyone, this is Bentley, and today we're going to be talking about why this filter sucks, the undergravel filter. Now, this isn't the whole setup, right? This is just the plate that you would put in place, and its appropriate connection. You'd have a hard airline tube that comes down here with an air stone. And the whole goal of this filter is super simple. It creates a space under here to allow water flow to move, and then you pile on your substrate. Back in the day, it was just gravel typically on top, and what's going to happen is the air moving through this uplift tube, much like our sponge filter, is going to cause water flow to go down and through. So it's going to pull all your particulates, all your muck, all your fish waste down into the gravel because of the water power that's moving this way. And what that's going to do is cause all your beneficial bacteria in your gravel to do the work. There's a lot of problems with this thing. One, because the standard design is just this open grid here, you don't have any extra ways to add more beneficial bacteria to the cleanest surface. And often what your real problem becomes is that as you're slowly using your gravel, which will have lots of surface area, don't get me wrong, as it sits there and gets more and more muck in it, eventually you get this big buildup of gunk down under here, and when you have to clean this thing, you can't just pop this off and suck it all out. You've got big layers of gravel. And you'll notice, even this, it's several inches. You usually need multiple inches of gravel to make this successful. A thin layer of gravel's not going to cut it. It's not going to hold enough. It's not going to be enough surface area. It's not the way these are designed. Also, it relies on coarse gravel. It relies on coarser substrates, right? You can't have that fine decorative sand bed over the top of this and get the system to work the way it wants to work. Now, most people might say, oh, well, you could do the deep sand bed on top of this. No, because the deep sand bed wants you to create an anaerobic environment, an environment with no oxygen or almost no oxygen. And this is designed to be run in a relatively highly oxygenated environment, just like your sponge filter. Servicing this thing is a freaking nightmare. That's the biggest problem. And one of the reasons why you would hear back in the ye olden times before powered filters were created and really air-driven filtration was the only way we did these things, and this was the science of the time all the way back to the early 1900s, basically. When you need to clean it, you would just hear, oh, I pulled all my gravel out, I cleaned the entire tank. You're basically redoing the tank from the ground up every time you need to service this. Not very efficient. Now, there are people who have done things with an undergravel filtration system where they use this and they connect it to a canister, but now you're not running the undergravel filter the way it's meant to be run. So that doesn't even count. Service on this sucks. And it's one of the primary reasons why a majority of our air-driven filtration has moved toward breeder boxes and most commonly sponge filters, or matten filters, which is kind of like the upgraded sponge. We'll talk about that in a different video. That is one of the biggest reasons why this thing sucks, but let's talk about a few others. Aesthetically, not so bad because it can hide under the gravel, right? And this little lip here and all that was going to hide under the rim of your tank. Here, you're really not going to see it, except for this big old ugly tube, and you need the tube to be as tall as possible because it creates the most uplift, and you need that additional flow to pull water at a reasonable pace through the gravel so that all of your muck and your turnover rate is reasonable enough to actually get the level of beneficial bacteria production, and thus turning your ammonia to nitrite to nitrate that you would be looking for. Here's the problem, though. It's still driven by air. So if you want to do this, you need to be pushing a lot of air, which means you need a relatively powerful air pump. Or you need to do something like a full air system with like a linear air piston. Again, you need high rates of air, because if you were to not pay attention to your water levels and it starts getting down here, air can only push water up above the water line so well. And because this is naturally wants to be very tall, if you're not mitigating that problem by keeping your water level very, very uniform the entire time, this eventually stops doing part of its job, which is to say the water stops cycling as effectively as it could or should, and now it's not working very well. So you have to keep your water level critically accurate with these things in order to make sure that they keep running at their maximum efficiency. Sponge filters don't have that problem because they sit lower, they have a shorter uplift tube. Very rarely are you going to let evaporation happen to the point of where its uplift tube is above water or no longer able to move water at a reasonable rate. Not the case with the undergravel filters. There's a second reason why it's a problem. You got to pay a big attention to your water level. And most people might be like, Bentley, it's nitpicky. I keep my water level really good anyway. I do my water changes. Why would I worry? Still, if you were to go on vacation or something like that, and you have somebody who's just feeding your fish, they might not know, and over that period of time, you might have enough evaporation to where if you were running these things, you could run into issues. I know what you're thinking. Just shorten the tube a little bit. Don't have it all the way at the top. But then you're minimizing the amount of uplift, and thus the amount of water flow moving through the system, and now you're not getting optimal filtration out of the way this is designed to function. The next reason why these suck. This, I don't know how well you can see this, but this is pretty flimsy. It's cheap plastic. Now granted, you just need to set it and forget it, right? Other than that whole thing where you need to service it correctly, and then it becomes a problem, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Because this thing is flimsy, there's an inherent risk of breakage, and when you break the grating, now you can get gravel getting underneath, it clogs it up even faster, it makes all sorts of other problems. These are not the most robust design. It's thin-ish, inexpensive plastic. Now the good news is, these are relatively cheap to buy, so if you do break one, you can kind of just buy another one, but then you have to rip all your gravel out and replace it whenever the next time is you're going to do service or what have you. It's hassle. It's hassle. Now here's the other big thing that I want to talk about. Assuming you did this very old school and you did not have plants in your tank, you need to maintenance this more often because you don't have something that is naturally capitalizing on those nitrates at the end of the waste cycle. But the problem is because you're pulling all that mulm down, you have water flow purposely working to pull it down all the way to the bottom of the tank. Gravel vacuuming this actually becomes more difficult. It's not like a tank like this where if you wanted to gravel vacuum, most of it sits toward the top level. It's not really getting all the way down. And if it is, you might have something like a active substrate or plants that are absorbing the potentially dangerous levels of nitrate and other things that can occur that this is not doing. So you will have to gravel vac this more often, or you're going to have to figure out a way to really effectively surface this under level to get all your excess mulm out to keep your nitrates in check to make sure that they don't keep rising and rising. I don't know the first thing you're thinking, right? Bentley, I can just do a water change. As it builds up over time, water changes aren't going to be enough. If you have enough mulm in your gravel, which this is designed to capture a lot of mulm, eventually you're going to have kind of a critical mass, and that level of nitrate is going to stay elevated regardless of a water change. You're going to have 200, 300 parts per million nitrate, and while that's not immediately toxic and scary, even though a lot of us want to treat it that way, over time it's going to be a problem for your fish. So even a 50% water change is only going to bring it down so much, and it'll get right back to that level relatively quickly. It requires you to get the mulm out, and that can be very difficult with a very thick layer of substrate. over the top of something that's designed to pull all that mold, all that muck, all that fish poo down as deep as possible because of the inherent design of the filter. Now, my last thing for you. My last why the undergravel filter sucks. There is a giant association most recently with a specific style of filtration, anoxic filtration. However, just having an undergravel filter, creating a plenum, an open space underneath your gravel, does not mean you're creating anoxic environments. But a lot of people will think this is the way to do anoxic. So there is kind of a unfortunate, unintentional self-deception that a lot of people will do, thinking like, all I have to do is put this in place and have gravel over top, and I can create an anoxic environment and have anoxic bacteria, and they'll naturally denitrify for me. Except the problem is, without the right sources and building it exactly correct, you're never going to produce that environment. And you'll think, I've got denitrifying bacteria. I don't need to worry about going and checking my nitrates anymore. And your nitrates will climb and climb and climb because all that muck that's sitting in there, all that fish poo, that waste, etc. You got great bacteria colonies, aerobic bacteria that are turning that ammonia into nitrite, and they're turning that nitrite into nitrate, but there's not any anoxic bacteria to denitrify. So now you have continuously climbing layers of nitrates, and you will eventually make an environment that is potentially toxic to your fish. Just because you have this does not mean you're doing anoxic filtration. But a lot of people, due to whether it's internet or popularity of certain filtration styles coming around, might think that this is all you need. And it's not. And that's part of why this sucks, is that unfortunately people think that it does more than it actually does. That's it. It's pretty simple. Really, the biggest problem with this thing, other than like this big dorky tube that can go kind of ugly, and needing a very thick layer of substrate, so if you don't want to have some big chunky layer of substrate sitting here, this might not be your thing aesthetically speaking. And also, just when you do need to maintenance it, it can be a little bit of a bear. Now, there are some people that are very familiar with these systems, and they have their tips and tricks, and you'll be commenting down below. You'll be raging at me, Bentley, you're an idiot, blah, blah, blah. Have at it. I can't wait to hear it. For the rest of you, if you enjoyed this video, give it a little thumbs up, leave a comment down below. Have you ever tried an undergravel filter, and what was your experience? Did you enjoy it? Do you still use one to this day? Did you hate it and turn it into a sponge filter? Because, really, it's like the best filter out there, isn't it? Next week, we'll be talking about why this thing is awesome. And if you enjoy that kind of content, the pros and the cons split into separate things to let you get a narrowed-in view of stuff, consider subscribing. As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching. And stay awesome.